On February 28th, 2026, at 6 in the morning, fighter jets lifted off from their bases across the region. The target, a man more heavily guarded than any other leader on the planet. A man who had ruled his country for 37 years straight. A man who had survived assassinations, revolutions, wars, and decades of sanctions. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. By 10 in the morning, he was gone. But here's what almost nobody is talking about. This assassination wasn't planned over days or weeks. It was years in the making. There were moles, hacked cameras, compromised phones, and secret meetings at Mar-a-Lago. And when it finally happened, it wasn't just one man who died. In a single morning, Iran lost its entire military and political leadership. Stay until the end. Because the final piece of this story explains why this single day could reshape the entire Middle East for decades to come, and why what happens in Tehran over the next few months may be the most important geopolitical story of our lifetime. To understand the scale of what happened on February 28th, you first need to understand who Khamenei actually was. Because a lot of people in the West hear Supreme Leader and think it's just a fancy title. It's not. This wasn't a president you could vote out every 4 years. This wasn't a prime minister who answers to a parliament. The supreme leader of Iran, the Rahbar, is the highest authority in the country. Full stop. His word stands above the Constitution, above the elected president, above the parliament, above the military. Every single branch of Iranian power ultimately answered to him. Khamenei took that position in 1989, right after the death of the Islamic Republic's founder, Ayatollah Khamenei. And he held it for 37 years. To put that in perspective, when Khamenei became supreme leader, the Berlin Wall had just fallen, George H.W. Bush was president of the United States, and the internet didn't exist yet as we know it today. In those 37 years, he survived multiple assassination attempts. He survived the Iran-Iraq War. He survived crippling economic sanctions. He survived internal uprisings. He survived the Arab Spring. He watched the United States invade Afghanistan and Iraq, two of Iran's neighbors, and he kept his grip on power through all of it. And he was protected accordingly. His location was one of the most closely guarded secrets in the world. Constant route changes, multiple undisclosed residences scattered across Tehran and beyond, a personal security detail numbering in the hundreds, not a single public appearance without an elaborate, multi-layered protection operation surrounding him. Even senior Iranian officials rarely knew his exact location on any given day. For any intelligence agency in the world, this was considered nearly an impossible target. The kind of target you plan for years knowing you might never get the shot. Why do I say nearly impossible? Because Israel's Mossad has a very different relationship with the word impossible, and they started building this operation long before anyone on the outside knew it existed. So here's the question everyone should be asking. How do you find a man who doesn't want to be found? How do you track someone whose entire existence is designed around disappearing? The answer: you don't look for the man. You look for everything around him. The first tool was Tehran's own surveillance infrastructure. Israeli intelligence, working over a period of years, managed to infiltrate and access Tehran's citywide camera network. We're not talking about hacking a few traffic cameras. We're talking about systematic, long-term access to a significant portion of the capital's surveillance system. Through this access, analysts were able to map the movement patterns of Khamenei's security convoys, which routes they preferred, which times of day certain roads were used, which residential and government buildings saw repeated activity from known security vehicles. Over time, this data built a detailed picture of where Khamenei spent his time, even when his exact location was never officially confirmed. The second tool was something even more personal: the phones of the people around him. This is a detail that doesn't get nearly enough attention. Khamenei himself was famously careful about communications. He did not carry a personal phone. He understood better than almost anyone that a phone is a tracking device. But the people around him, his bodyguards, his aides, members of his inner circle, knowing they all carried phones. And phones are beacons. Israeli intelligence compromised the personal devices of multiple individuals in Khamenei's immediate orbit. Through those devices, they were able to track his movements with remarkable precision, sometimes down to the meter. Every time those phones moved, the analysts knew where Khamenei's protection detail was. And where the protection detail was, Khamenei was close behind. This technology, by the way, wasn't deployed for the first time in February 2026. It was first used and tested back in June 2025, when one of Iran's secret underground command facilities was destroyed in a precision strike. That operation was, in hindsight, the rehearsal, the proof of concept, the moment Israeli intelligence confirmed the method worked. But tracking someone's location is only half the problem. The other half is timing. Knowing where someone will be is one thing. Knowing when the entire leadership will be gathered in one place at one time, that's something else entirely that requires someone on the inside. And this brings us to the third tool, the most explosive part of this story, and the part that Iranian investigators are still unraveling. After the operation, Iranian intelligence began the brutal process of figuring out how this happened. How did the Israelis know? How did they pick that specific morning, that specific location, that specific meeting? And as they dug through the timeline, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. The commander of the Quds Force, Iran's elite external operations unit, a man named Ismail Khani, had left 3 separate high-level meetings early in the months leading up to the strike. Not once. 3 times. Each time, an Israeli strike followed shortly after. June 2025, Khani left early. Strike followed. Later in 2025, Khani left early. Strike followed. February 2026, Khani left early. And this time, the strike killed the supreme leader himself, along with nearly every senior military commander in the country. 3 times. In the intelligence world, 1 coincidence is noted. 2 coincidences are investigated. 3 coincidences are a confession. Iranian investigators have not publicly confirmed what they found, but the fact that Khani has not appeared in public since the operation, and that several members of his staff have reportedly been detained, tells you everything you need to know. Now let's talk about the political side of this story, because what happened on February 28th didn't come out of nowhere. It was the result of a decision made at the highest levels of the American and Israeli governments. In December 2025, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu made a personal trip to Mar-a-Lago to meet with President Trump. And it wasn't a diplomatic formality. According to multiple reports from outlets that covered the meeting, this was a working session, detailed, strategic, and focused on Iran. 2 months later, in February 2026, the 2 leaders met again, this time at the White House. The timing of that second meeting, just weeks before the strike, was not a coincidence. American and Israeli military and intelligence planners had been running scenarios on Iran's nuclear and military leadership for years. But the political green light, the decision to actually move, required alignment between Washington and Jerusalem. And by early 2026, that alignment existed. The trigger was the collapse of negotiations. For months, the Trump administration had been pushing Iran toward a new nuclear agreement. The terms were straightforward: halt uranium enrichment above a certain level, allow expanded inspections, scale back the ballistic missile program. Tehran said no, and then said no again. And American intelligence began picking up signals that Iran wasn't just stalling. It was actively planning retaliatory strikes against U.S. military assets in the region. At that point, from Washington's perspective, the calculus changed. Waiting was no longer the safe option. Waiting meant absorbing a first strike. And Trump made the call. If a strike is coming, it's going to come from us first. To execute the operation, the United States repositioned an enormous amount of military hardware. 2 carrier strike groups moved into the region. More than a dozen destroyers and cruisers were repositioned. Roughly 200 combat aircraft, a mix of F-35s, F-15, and B-2 stealth bombers operating from Diego Garcia, were brought into range. It was the largest American military deployment to the Middle East in over 20 years, and it was done deliberately, visibly, as both preparation and warning. Iran saw it coming. They knew something was coming. What they didn't know was exactly when or exactly how. Intelligence had identified several meetings over a period of days where Khamenei was expected to be present. Different options were on the table. The team chose the morning session on February 28th, and they made one crucial tactical decision that Iran never anticipated. Every previous major Israeli strike, in Lebanon, in Syria, against Iranian assets in 2025, had come at night. Night operations were the expected pattern. Iran's air defense systems, its command centers, its alert protocols, all were calibrated around the assumption that a serious strike would come after dark. So they hit in broad daylight. At approximately 6 in the morning, aircraft took off from multiple bases. But the bombs didn't fall first. The first phase of the operation was suppression. Electronic warfare systems and specialized munitions targeted Tehran's integrated air defense network. Radar stations were blinded. Communication links between defense systems were severed. In the critical opening minutes, Iran's ability to coordinate a defensive response was systematically dismantled. By the time air defense operators understood what was happening, the strike package was already inbound. 30 precision-guided munitions hit the compound, and the building where the morning meeting was taking place was destroyed completely. Inside at the time of the strike were Khamenei himself, his senior political advisors, the commander of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the chief of the General Staff of the Iranian Armed Forces, the Minister of Defense, the head of National Security, and several other senior figures. In addition to the military and political leadership, 4 members of Khamenei's family were also present: his daughter, his son-in-law, his daughter-in-law, and a grandchild. All were killed. By the end of the first day of operations, according to reports, approximately 40 senior military commanders and government officials had been killed across multiple strikes targeting different locations simultaneously. Iran's chain of command did not just lose its head, and it was effectively decapitated at every level. What came next was not silence. Iran fought back. The Revolutionary Guards, operating without central coordination for the first time in decades, launched a series of retaliatory ballistic missile strikes. One of those missiles struck a residential building in Tel Aviv, killing civilians. Hezbollah in Lebanon opened a northern front against Israel. Houthi forces in Yemen resumed attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. Iran's acting president appeared on state television and declared that the killing of the supreme leader was not just an attack on Iran, it was a declaration of war against Islam itself and against every Muslim on earth. Trump addressed the nation from the Oval Office. His message was direct. The strikes would continue until Iran's nuclear program was destroyed and its ability to threaten American forces and American allies in the region was eliminated. He called Khamenei's death a moment of liberation and said the Iranian people deserved to be free from the regime that had oppressed them for nearly 50 years. But here is the question that matters most right now, the question that will define what the next 10 years look like in the Middle East. Who is actually running Iran? Under the Islamic Republic's constitution, the death of a supreme leader triggers a specific process. A body called the Assembly of Experts, 88 Islamic scholars elected by the Iranian public, is responsible for selecting a successor. That successor must meet strict requirements. He must be male. He must be a senior Islamic cleric. He must have a demonstrated record of religious scholarship, political competence, and unwavering loyalty to the principles of the Islamic Republic. Right now, that process is happening in the middle of an active war. With Iran's military in disarray, its economy under maximum pressure from sanctions, and its population, which has been protesting against the regime for years, watching closely to see what comes next. A temporary governing council has taken over day-to-day functions. But a council is not a supreme leader. A council cannot project the same authority, the same theological legitimacy, the same fear that kept Iran's various factions in line for 37 years. The Revolutionary Guards, the regular military, the political establishment, the clerical elite, they all have different interests. Different candidates they want to see in power. Different visions for what Iran should be after this moment. This is the opening, not just for the United States and Israel, but potentially for the Iranian people themselves. Trump understands this. When he said that Khamenei's death represented the greatest opportunity for the Iranian people to reclaim their country, he wasn't just making a political statement. He was identifying the real strategic objective. The bombs are the short-term play. The long-term play is what happens inside Iran over the next 6 to 12 months. If the succession process produces a hardline successor who doubles down on confrontation, the region stays in crisis. If the process produces someone more pragmatic, more open to negotiation, more responsive to the Iranian public's actual needs, then February 28th, 2026 may turn out to be the day the trajectory of the entire region changed. The bottom line is this: February 28th, 2026 changed the Middle East forever. Not simply because one man died, but because something fundamental was demonstrated to every government, every military, and every intelligence agency on Earth. The most protected target in one of the most closed and hostile countries in the world can be found, tracked, and eliminated. No amount of security protocols, no amount of route changes, no amount of secrecy is absolute. Not when your own people can be turned. Not when your own infrastructure can be used against you. That changes the calculus for every authoritarian government watching this unfold, and a lot of them are watching very carefully. What comes next? Who takes Khamenei's place? How Iran's military responds over the coming weeks? And what role Russia is quietly playing behind the scenes while all eyes are on Tehran? That is what I'm covering in the next episode. If you found this valuable, subscribe to Alex P.S. Insights. This is where I break down the stories behind the headlines, the decisions, the intelligence operations, and the power plays that mainstream media either can't explain or won't. I'll see you in the next one.